Emotional suffering creates negative thoughts, which the person sometimes feels compelled to say out loud, presenting the thoughts as facts. These thoughts and negative statements are called distortions when they contradict facts or don't have facts to back them up, or when they are mere opinions. Judgments, for example, are always opinions, and never facts. Frequent negative self-judgments reflect self-hatred problems and must be challenged because they're quite harmful. Assumptions are when our minds make up ideas without evidence and are particularly problematic when they contradict facts. The most common assumptions are hopeless thinking and mind reading. Hopeless thinking, which we sometimes call negative fortune-telling, increases depression and suicidal feelings. It's magical thinking because we don't actually know what the future holds, even when we act like we do. Many negative things that depressed people predict don't happen, even when they feel absolutely certain about their predictions. It's an illusion. Another common assumption is mind reading, when we assume what other people are thinking or feeling. Commonly, it's assuming others are judging, feeling angry, or have negative plans or intentions. These are the most obvious because you usually know when somebody makes false statements about what you are thinking and feeling. All or nothing statements include the words always, never, everybody, or nobody. Emotional suffering creates these negative thoughts, and saying them out loud, as if they are facts, increases suffering. Here are examples of judgments, assumptions, and all or nothing comments. Judgments include, I'm not good enough, I'm bad, I'm a loser, I'm ugly, I'm fat, and I'm a failure. Should statements are often judgments about behaviors. Similarly, saying a person's behavior is wrong is a judgment about their behavior. Assumptions include, I won't ever, I can't, they will never, you are judging me. Examples of all or nothing statements are, I do everything wrong, nobody likes me, and I have no friends. You can use the DBT Give Dear Man skill to discourage your teen from talking in ways that strengthen their distorted thoughts and underlying suffering. Dear Man is the way to describe their distorted statement and redirect them to more skillful ways of responding to their hurtful thoughts. Sometimes you may want to start with the give skill, which means you could say something like, it sounds like you have a lot of self-hatred, or, I hear that you are feeling really hopeless. Followed by, tell me more about that, and then you would summarize what they say about the difficult situations they have experienced and their underlying emotions. If they won't say much, you can say something like, that sounds really hard to have that self-hatred or that hopelessness. Explain the harm from acting like the thought is a fact. The main focus is your request for them to express themselves more skillfully. Describe the skill you want them to use and show an example of it. You can say to them, instead of saying it that way, you can say something like this. Tell them exactly what they could say to skillfully communicate their experience. Make sure this is not just a lecture. Try your best to get them to do the skill now by saying out loud the better way to express themselves. Options like what you see in the next slide. The simplest way to show alternatives to distortions is to say, you just had the thought, and then you would repeat back the thought verbatim. For example, you could tell your teen, you just had the thought, I will never be able to do this, or you can say, so the thought I will never be able to do this popped into your mind. Or you can say, the thought I will never be able to do this just went through your mind. When you hear an assumption, you can say, you just had an assumption thought, and can you think of other possible interpretations? When you hear judgments, you can say, that's a judgment, not a fact, and you can show alternatives to judgments that use the described skill. For example, you could tell your teen that they can say, what I did was not effective, rather than say, I was bad, or you can tell them to instead say, when I did that, it was harmful. And now I can work on making up for it. When you hear hopelessness, you can say, you just had a hopeless thought. What are other possibilities about what could happen? Can you gather some more facts about these difficulties rather than assuming the worst? When you hear mind reading, you can say, you just had a thought about my thoughts, then you would say verbatim what the thought is. Like, you're thinking that I'm judging you right now, is that right? Then you would say, what else could I possibly be thinking and feeling? Can you please find out rather than assume? Go ahead and ask me, please. Don't continue until they ask you. This process is often very clear when they are assuming what you are thinking or feeling, because you know for sure that their assumption about you is false. However, it's often trickier when they are mind-reading others, but it's a similar process. You can tell them, you just had a mind-reading thought that she is thinking she doesn't care about you. And then, what are other possible interpretations of why she said that? And then, can you please use the check the facts skill? Go ahead and ask her and find out if she's actually thinking that. This can be very hard when we can't ask the other person, or when your teen claims the other person is not honestly describing their own thoughts and feelings. This is like how we can't prove to your teen that their hopeless thoughts are not accurate statements about the future. In these cases, it's best to tell them that 100% rigid thinking maximizes suffering, when they don't even acknowledge other possibilities. Try to get them to acknowledge other interpretations that may be possible, rather than trying to prove that their interpretations are wrong, or much less likely than yours. Tell them, you could instead say, I just had the thought, or, I'm noticing the thought, and then say exactly what the thought was. For example, I just noticed the thought, I can never do this right. I just had a judgment thought. It's a thought, not a fact. What I did wasn't effective. A hopeless thought just went through my mind. I just had a thought about your thoughts about me. That you are thinking that what I want doesn't matter. What are you actually thinking? My mind has the assumption that I will fail the class and you'll be mad at me. And it's also possible that I will barely get a passing grade. And it's possible that you will be supportive if I don't pass the class. My brain sent me the thought that I'm fat. Part of discouraging your teen from talking with distortions is to explain how it's harmful. Your teen needs to understand that emotion-driven comments increase the suffering that creates the comments. If their dysfunctional emotions make them say dysfunctional things, the more they say them, the more their emotional suffering increases. It's a vicious cycle of emotions causing behaviors, and behaviors causing emotions. One example is what we call rumination, which is a form of venting. When the person repeats worries, regrets, or judgments, and they do it frequently, or at a very fast pace. Speaking intensely or revved up will make your teen feel even more revved up. Ruminating out loud increases their rumination thoughts and feelings. Tell them how their self-judgments increase their self-hatred. You can say something like, you say it because you believe it, and you believe it because you say it. Every time you say it, your brain believes it even more. And the more you believe your judgments, the more you suffer. Emotional suffering creates negative thoughts like, I'm not good enough, nobody likes me, or I'm a loser. And saying those things out loud, like they are facts, makes your teen feel even more inferior, rejected, and unloved. Hopeless comments increase hopeless feelings in the same way. Repeating the words, I can't, increases hopeless feelings. Also, explain the harm from comments that glorify escape coping. Saying, I want to die, makes them less able to tolerate difficult things. It increases their need to escape. There are several common traps to avoid. One is when you accidentally strengthen their self-hatred and shame when you frequently correct their negative statements with reassurance, compliments, or praise. If their hopeless statements too often get you to reassure them, their hopelessness could actually increase because they end up depending on your reassurances. If their self-judgments often get you to give more compliments, praise, or affirmations of love, then their self-hatred could actually increase because they end up depending on your affirmations. Another trap is when you assume they have judgments or assumptions, but you haven't yet established it as a fact. Be very careful about this. Try your best to model the skills and not model distortions. The most common is when parents make judgmental comments about their teen or make assumptions. Many judgments are obvious to parents when they catch themselves getting frustrated or angry with their teen. Admit these slips and say, I'm sorry, I know that's a judgment. What I meant to say was I really didn't like it when you did that. It caused me a lot of trouble. Try not to say things like bad thoughts or bad behaviors. Stay away from words like good or bad, right or wrong, should, and appropriate. An example of a parent's assumption is when parents express that their teen's problem behaviors are intentional or done with awareness. The worst example is accusing your teen of lying, which assumes a selfish intention to deceive, when in reality, there are other explanations for the apparent inconsistency. Another example is when you assume your teen is judging or making assumptions, but you haven't yet established it as a fact. Very often these are plausible ideas that largely come from us interpreting their behaviors and voice tone. It's safest to ask them to confirm your guess about their thoughts and feelings. Things like, am I understanding correctly that you are having a judgmental thought about me? Am I correct that you are angry right now? What are your thoughts about this? What are you thinking that I'm thinking? What are you actually thinking? Are you thinking that I'm planning to say no to you? Make sure that your teen sees you using these skills to correct your own distortions and the distortions of the other parent, even small distortions, even when they have nothing to do with your teen. We want them to frequently see you use the skills of mindfulness of your thoughts, flexible interpretations, and checking the facts. For example, when you are near your teen and you tell the other parent, "That was really bad that I did that," you could say, "Actually, that's a judgment. What I want to say is that I wish I hadn't done that because it didn't work out that well." If the other parent said something like that, you could say, "Hey, that's a judgment. Can you please say it without the judgment?" And then they could say, "You're right. What I meant to say is I wish I hadn't done that because it didn't go well." It also helps your teen when you show empathy for yourself and others because it models it. Another example is if you heard a mind-reading comment from the other parent, you could say, "You just had a mind-reading thought. Can you please use the check the facts skill rather than assume?" Rather than saying, "That's not gonna happen," say, "I feel doubtful about that." Rather than saying, "I can't do that," say, "I don't feel confident that I can do that." Helping your teen with distortions is often a very difficult process, so it's crucial that you keep practicing and get help from your parent training therapist. You may also need to share your observations about your teen's distortions with their primary therapist so they can help too.